Hello friends, this is Coop from Garage Gym Reviews. Back in the Garage Gym today to do the first in a series of reviews that we're going to do on cheap squat racks. This one in particular is the Fitness Reality 810 XLT. I've reviewed it in the past, but they've since made some updates. In addition to that, there's also some attachments for it that specifically the Lat Pulldown that we're gonna review. Now, before I get started, one thing I want to ask you is, number one, which squat racks after this one would you like to see us review? There are many within this price point. We have done many of the higher end racks, but one thing we recognize is that people use the squat rack as kind of a gateway drug to build a home gym, and they often try to do it cheaply. So let me know which squat racks you'd like to see next. In addition to that, if you'd like to see this one compared to others, at the end of these, I'm gonna do a breakdown roundup of all of the cheaper end squat racks and compare them. So if you'd like to see that, make sure you subscribe. But without any more lead up, let's get into the review. Now, if you've been around the channel a while, this is the rack, the exact rack actually, that we dropped nearly or over 800 pounds on. Yes, this has a max capacity of 800 pounds, and Sam and I tested it to that weight limit by dropping it from the height that the J-cups are currently set at. With the J-cups, actually if you zoom in, you can tell they actually still have the wood blocks that we made to roll it off on, and we had to replace the spotter arms because they bent. But other than that, this is the exact same rack that we used to drop that amount of weight on. So when you're looking at this rack and this system and kind of racks within this price point, we've basically proven that you don't need to spend a ton of money with a crazy thick upright that's 3x3, 11 gauge steel. You can do something smaller that's cheaper that can still be safe. Now, when we did that review, I heard from a ton of you that you've added it to your gym and you've used it. If you'd like to add this one now after watching this video, I'll put a link below the like button that you can check out that will send you to Amazon to purchase. If you'd like to purchase there, Amazon will pay us a small commission just for transparency's sake. It's not gonna increase the cost you pay. Now, this rack is not designed to be the biggest, baddest rack in the world, as I've said previously. This rack is really, I think, designed to get people started, or somebody that's really just on a budget. They don't care so much about the gear and the customization, the attachments, the modularity, or just all those things that are involved in buying the more expensive racks. But I do think this is a rack that you could get legitimately very strong with and could use for the rest of your life and really have no issues. But let me get into some of the construction and compare it to kind of other things that you'd be looking at. First off, the upright size is a 2x2. Most racks are a wider geometry. It's just gonna provide more stability, but it's gonna be more expensive because it's gonna be heavier. It's also more expensive steel, and it costs more to ship because it takes up more space. A 2x2 rack, I actually prefer probably a 2x3 rack because this means you can use attachments on all sides. That said, there are no holes on the outside of the rack. All the holes are forward or backward facing, which is one of the reasons that this is cheaper than maybe some other options that are out there. But due to the gauge of steel, it kind of has to be that way. So this uses a 14 gauge steel. Most racks that you see that are like the really expensive ones, like the Rogue Monsters of the world, the Rep PR 5000s, those sorts of racks, they're using an 11 gauge steel. 11 gauge is better, it's superior because it's more stable, but again, same thing with the size of the upright, it's more expensive. 14 gauge, we've tested, 14 gauge is fine. I personally prefer a thicker gauge, but I don't think you need to be worried if you have a 14 gauge rack if it's going to be less safe. That's not really a reality. It's not a fitness reality. It's not something you really have to worry about. Like obviously thicker, bigger is always better, but not necessarily in this case. I think you're just fine with a 14 gauge. Another thing about this rack that is nice for most home gym owners are the dimensions. Both the dimensions and the way that it's secured. So this is a flat foot rack. It's taken quite a few years for companies to start to come out with flat foot racks. In fact, there are flat foot racks out there that I see tons and tons of reviews on, but I hardly hear companies talk about. An example of this is Rogue. They have their flat foot Monster Light rack. It still has the same pictures that they took of this rack like 10 years ago. I see no marketing, yet it has some of the most reviews on their site. I don't know why companies don't make more flat foot racks. Rep came out with their Omni rack and really haven't done a lot with it, but I like the flat foot rack. The flat foot rack is nice because it's more stable than the one that doesn't have flat foot rack, especially one that doesn't have weight storage. And this does not have weight storage and doesn't have the optionality to have weight storage. They don't have an attachment at this point that I've seen that uses added weight storage, although competitors do, which is something I'd like to see added to this. I like the flat foot. It makes it stable, it doesn't take up a ton of extra room, and I think the overall dimensions are nice. So the interior diameter of the rack is 24 inches. This gives you enough space to move around. The outside to outside width is just under 47 inch. That's kind of the gold standard. Most people want that. This is 46.5 inch. That allows you to rack and unrack the bar without having any problems with the collars on your bar hitting it. Like, that is a legitimate thing for a lot of people. If you're lifting max weight and you're doing a walkout sequence where it's like a couple steps, you secure and squat, you know, you kind of get in that rhythm because all you want to focus on is bracing. When you hit that rack, when you're coming out, like, that can really mess up your setup, and really for some people can mess up the whole set. So having the option for the 46.5 inch outside to outside diameter is very nice. And I like the 24 inch inside diameter because that means there's enough room to move around. My first rack, the Rogar 3, that's what mine was, and I've had no issues with that size. Now, one thing you'll notice on the rack is it does have these two cross member bars of some sort attached to the back of the rack. I want to be clear here, this is not my favorite way to secure these racks. I like having a walk-through rack. One reason it's nice is because you may put it somewhere that you actually want to walk through. But the other thing is they can get in the way sometimes. Honestly, you're not gonna have a problem with them being there. Like, you can still get under the bar fine. You can still put a bench in there fine. Adjustable bench, it may take up a little bit of space for an adjustable bench to use inside the rack, but there's workarounds for that. It's just not my favorite. There are other companies that are using thicker cross members at the top that do the same thing, but this is the way that Fitness Reality designed it from the start. And it does kind of have a benefit, and one of the benefits is they use those same crossbars to connect to the lat pull down. And actually, this is kind of interesting. Because of the way they're angled, they're actually very similar, if not the same angle as what Rep uses on their rear cross member. And this is a really good feature because the problem is if you have a straight cross member there, you're not really able to use the back uprights. We've seen this with Titan. They came out with their lat pull down that attached to the rack on the Titan series, and it was a straight bar, and it basically negated any use you could have on that back uprights. So Fitness Reality actually had this before Rep did on their upper racks. I don't know if they're inspired by this or just came up with it on their own, but it is a good idea, and I'm glad they have it angled. But to the part on this rack that I think is interesting and somewhat new for a lot of people is the lat pull down. This has a center mount lat pull down on a rack that is extremely cheap. I mean, this rack by itself is $300 shipped to your door from Amazon. Like, that is freaking cheap. Now, it has been cheaper in years past. Obviously, steel has increased, inflation, there are all sorts of economic factors that have increased the cost and made it harder for owning a home gym and just for living in general. I mean, have you seen the price of eggs lately? But when you look at the landscape, $300 is extremely competitive. And the lat pull down is only $240 on top of that. And there's often sales that make it even cheaper. And the lat pull down is generally okay. It's very similar to the rack. There are things I like about it and things I don't. The real thing that I like about it, and most of you will like about it, is the obvious one, and that is the price. The price is very good, and it allows you to do a true full vertical lat pull down and low row. Now, oftentimes with some of these cheaper racks and manufacturers, they'll skimp on some of the components because they're often not actually using the equipment. An example is lat pull downs. You can buy a cheaper lat pull down and it'll have like a pole that's like a 45-degree angle. That's not a lat pull down, okay? A lat pull down is trying to simulate a pull up. A pull up due to gravity is a pretty much perfectly vertical pole. You want that on a lat pull down. You at least want that as an option. This has that option due to the way that it connects to the multi-grip pull-up bar at the top and the way it connects to the rear cross members. It's able to have a vertical pull. In the way that you secure your legs, this is also smart. They're basically reusing their rear cross members. They send you one that's like it, but instead of being bolted to the uprights, it actually has holes in it that slide through the spotter arms. This allows it to be put on quickly and taken off quickly, something I think matters. When I first saw it online, I thought they were actually bolted on. It's hard to tell, but they just slide on. And this is actually a really good feature. It then has foam on there as well, which you can use to stabilize your feet. Another cool thing about this, just side note, is you could place this lower and use it for like rear elevated split squats or Bulgarian squats, things like that. This is something they don't market for this, but because the foam's there and because that's bar there, like it just increases the versatility of your rack. Now, outside of the lat pull down, it also has a low row. This entire system has a 270-pound weight capacity. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you put 100 pounds on there, it's gonna be 100 pounds or thereabouts. The carriage adds a little bit of weight, but you're gonna be able to get just about as heavy as you want. There are competitors out there like the Rep PR 1100 that have a higher weight capacity of like 450 pounds. I would guess that's due to the cabling they're using. That being said, nearly 300 pounds should be enough for most of you. I like the low row. I don't love the angle of the low row. I appreciate and prefer a little bit higher cable placement for the low row, but again, these are minor things. The pulleys they're using though are plastic pulleys with bearings. It's somewhat smooth, like it's what you'd expect. Feels very similar to the Titan wall mount lat pulley. Like it's not tremendous, you know, you're not gonna like go tell your buddies like this is the smoothest lat pull down I've ever used, although I don't know if anybody's telling their buddies that sort of thing. But one of the things that leads to some of the friction is the way that they're adding weight on the back post. So this uses a carriage system, which this makes sense for the price, but they're using a chrome upright, a chrome tube, 2x2, same as the uprights they're using on the rack, but it's chromed with a carriage that sits around it and then like some plastic sheathing in between that helps to remove friction. This is not ideal. Obviously guide rods is superior, or rollers like on the Rogue Rhino would be superior. But again, for the cost, this is expected. And I didn't feel like the smoothness was off at all. One thing to note though that is annoying on this is it's using 1-inch standard hole plate sizing for the loadable horns on the rear carriage. That's not ideal. That does mean you can use 1-inch and Olympic plates, but just know like the 2-inch plates that you're used to using on your barbell, they'll fit on there fine, but they may move around. One reason that is nice though is you can use either size. So if you only have standard plates, you can use it with this. It just doesn't feel as nice of a fit and finish, and they just don't fit like quite with the same tolerances as you're used to on your barbell. Again, there are others out there within this price range. I'm thinking of the Rep PR 1100, that it has an Olympic size sleeve for that rack. But this rack is really designed for people that are looking to get into home gym cheaply. And sometimes to get into home gym cheaply, you go with a standard barbell. So I understand the change. So overall, let's get down to value. Brass tacks, this is the cheapest power rack with a lat pull down I could find. Now there are others we're gonna be reviewing. I'm thinking of like the Major Luti. Man, what a name, Major Luti. You also have the Rep PR 1000, PR 1100 series. You have the Sunny Health and Fitness rack. You have Hulk Fits of the world. You have the Titan T2. Fringe Sport has a rack within this realm. There's a lot that are out there that are trying to get your hard-earned dollars and trying to do it at a low price, because a lot of people are moving from a commercial gym to a home gym due to cost. They want to lower the cost. So these are great ways to get into it, and the power rack is kind of center. This is my big overarching theme. I love, even for cheaper racks, modularity and upgradability. This has decent in those regards. Like it's 540 bucks with the lat pull down. If you buy just the rack, it's 300 bucks. But you have the option to add things on over time. They also have a newer lat pull down crossover thing that has 2 carriages on the back. It's kind of an interesting design. I'd like to try it sometime. But there is ways that you can add and increase this over time, which I love. Another thing is this is using 1-inch holes. Although it's using 2x2 uprights with 14 gauge steel, you could technically use some of those higher end attachments on this. For instance, one of the attachments I use most often is a leg roller. You can use a leg roller on this just fine. And the reality is, you can't find many 5/8 holes leg rollers because of how thin that rod is. The companies are worried about it bending. So you can find some of those nicer attachments and still work on this, although they won't be perfect. Like you could even use some of the J-cups, like monolift arms, some of those things. Again, you just have to recognize there's gonna be some slop there and some play, but I think you could legitimately get by with this. So, in my opinion, this is still a good rack for the price. I mean, that price point is so low. I prefer these over a squat stand, and they're not that much more. We've tested these suckers to a lot of weight. They now have a lat pull down that gets the job done. If you look at the Amazon reviews, most of them are, it works, gets the job done, and allows me to get strong. And that's exactly what these do. And in fact, I like it enough that I recommend it to my parents. They have it in their home gym and they use it often and they're doing just fine with it. Okay, this has been my opinion. Again, what cheaper squat rack would you like to see next? Make sure you subscribe if you'd like to see the full breakdown of all of them. This has been Coop from Garage Gym Reviews, and I will see you next time. Peace.